Let's begin now. That's the last two messages. This is the penultimate message in the Gospel of John. Can't believe it. On our Jewish journey. Any of you walk for exercise? Walk for exercise on a treadmill whenever I can't avoid it. You get a good pace going, but then, so that you can make sure you do everything right, make sure at the end, the last minute or two, bring the speed down and do a little bit of a cool down. And what we're going to embark upon today and in a few weeks when we finish up the Gospel of John is really the cool down on our heated walk along the Jewish journey through the Gospel of John. Now, as usual, let's make sure we're all on the same page. And so I'll say previously, on a Jewish journey through the Gospel of John. So, what we saw just now, what we studied last week, is Yeshua transporting into the midst of the disciples and making his appearance known. He says, Shalom Aleichem. And the important thing to remember is not just the peace that I give to you, which is one of the themes of his upper room discourse, that the inheritance of the disciples and all believers is supernatural peace. In other words, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that each one of us can experience, that we can enjoy even in the midst of cultural and societal and life turmoil. Yeshua's peace is ours. And as the Father has sent me, so I send you. So we see the passing of the baton, the passing of the torch, if you will, from Yeshua's mission. The Father sent Yeshua on a mission. Yeshua said, Tetelestai, it is accomplished, it is finished. And he now passes on his mission to the apostles. And a week later, the disciples were again inside. Thomas, who had missed the first time, is with them. And Yeshua came. Again, this is the second appearance now to the disciples. And again, the doors having been shut, it's not like they forgot to say, Yeshua knocked down the door was open, and he came in. No, he appears. So whether he walks through the wall or whether he transports in, like Star Trek, I don't know. Use your imagination. Nonetheless, supernaturally, he stood in their midst and he said once again, Shalom Aleichem. When you see a statement within a short amount of literary real estate repeated, now this is the third time that we see this term, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you. It indicates a certain level of importance that John wanted us to know, that Yeshua is concerned that his disciples received his peace. And by application, that we enjoy that peace as well. So Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you. And of course, Thomas, who said, unless I see the scars on his head, I touch. Yeshua knew what Thomas had said when he wasn't in his presence. And now, a week later, he shows up and he says, okay, Thomas, show and tell, touch and tell. Reach here with your finger, see my hands, reach with your hand, put it on my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. Thomas answered and said to him, this is the climactic moment of the Gospel of John. This brings us all the way back to the very first verses in the prologue of John 1. Thomas answers and says, my Lord and my God. And we come full circle. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and now the disciples, even doubting Thomas, has gotten the message. I asked the question last week, did doubting Thomas become drama Thomas and go too far by identifying Yeshua as God? The answer is, of course, not. because Yeshua is identified from the very beginning of the book. Before we even are introduced to the character of Yeshua, we are introduced in the prologue that Yeshua is deity. So, a lot of people have a problem with how John presents Jesus, how the Gospel of John presents Jesus. We call this a high Christology. High Christology. It means that the picture in John of Jesus is very elevated. The picture of the Messiah is very elevated. We focus not just on his being a human being, a man, but very much so, equal time, maybe even more than equal time, is given to his deity. It's a high Christology. And so a lot of people are like, well, this is obviously a later interpretation. Later believers, 100, 200, 300 years later, said, okay, well, now that we have spent 100, 200, 300 years of believing in this God-man, let's create a gospel that, unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that give us a more human Messiah, let's have a God Messiah. And so we'll create John, and that will affirm what we already believe. It's nonsense. The issue with Yeshua is that he is indeed the God-man. If you can't accept the concept, that's one thing. But let's not pretend that the Gospel of John does not present Yeshua as God. He is fully human and fully God. Fully man, fully God. Both at the same time. If he were not, he could not accomplish what we have claimed, what the Bible claims that he has accomplished. He could not do what the Bible says he can do and has done if he is not who the Bible claims him to be. He can't do the what without being the who, in other words. And the reason that he can do the what, because he's the who, is why. That's the why, because he is the God-man. And so Jesus said to Thomas, and through John, says to us, the readers as well. Even 2,000 years, Jesus speaks to us through time and through space with these timeless words. Because you've seen me, have you believed? Here it is for us. Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. We who have not seen and yet believe are blessed, according to Yeshua. I take his word for it. So, if we summarize what we've seen, what convinced the believers to believe? We've taken 2 weeks thus far in the resurrection appearances. This is the third week. We'll talk about the resurrection appearance. What convinced believers to believe? John, of course, seeing the empty tombs evidence, the wrapped up linen, the grave clothes laid out nicely as if Yeshua made his bed. Mary was hearing Yeshua speak her name. The disciples seeing Yeshua. Thomas seeing Yeshua. We just saw, and perhaps touching the scars of Yeshua. And for us, we have faith without the benefit of sight. That, according to Yeshua, makes us blessed, even more blessed than the apostles who came before us. So what's the importance of our faith being firmly centered upon historical facts and eyewitness testimony of attested events? The importance is that we have a faith that is indeed rooted in history, objective truth, eyewitness testimony of historical events. And even if one discounts the eyewitness testimony, we still have the repercussions of something happened, some event happened that convinced a group of Jewish people, faithful Jewish people in the first century, including and not limited to some of the most highly trained and educated Jewish individuals of their day. Something convinced them to change their lives, to reorient their perspective, and to share the good news of a risen Messiah, so much so that not only was Israel turned upside down, but the entire world was turned upside down, and every one of these original disciples, with the exception perhaps of John, every one of these disciples died a martyr's death. They went to the grave, a torturous fate, for something they believed in, an event that they had witnessed. One cannot explain the rise of the first century church within the context, the cultural context of Judea, of the Jewish people. One cannot explain the rise of this simply from a sociological or a cultural or historical perspective if there is not a cause that the church has reacted to. And that cause must have been, the only explanation, must have been the empty tomb and the risen Messiah. Everything comes down to that. Remember what Paul said. If Yeshua is not resurrected, then we're a bunch of suckers. We are to be most pitied because we are wasting our time spinning our wheels. And of course, we would be guilty. If Yeshua is not resurrected, we would be guilty as Jews. We'd be guilty of Deuteronomy 13, of following a false prophet who has led us astray to worship another God. But if he's raised, well, I'll let you think about that. Let's get through it. Can we, like Thomas, proclaim that Yeshua is our Lord and our God? I guess you're catching the point that for me, the answer is absolutely. Yeshua is not only a human individual who lived, who is the son of David, who is the Messiah, but he is also deity. He is my Lord. He is my God. And I pray that that is true for you as well. That is your experience. It's true regardless of whether you accept it or not. It's true. He is Lord and God. But I pray that you experience that truth, that you have received that truth for yourself. Well, let's pick it up with where the video ended and where our new positions is here right before we get to chapter 21. Therefore, after Thomas says, my Lord, my God, therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in the book. John, the author, is now looking, he's wrapping things up, tying up the loose ends. He's wrapping things up. And as he looks back over the selected signs that he has included throughout his gospel narrative, he says, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, babe. I mean, I didn't give you everything there was. There's many other signs that Yeshua performed in the presence of the disciples. They're not written in this book. I picked out a couple of highlights for you. And again, when it comes to speaking of the gospel, and when it was written, this is not a figment of the 2nd or 3rd century AD church of their imagination, that they, having had a belief, need to then go back and write something that justifies the belief in Yeshua, this pagan idea of a God-man, and justify by writing the Gospel of John. We have papyrus, for example. This is just one that we have. P52, This dates from 100 to 150 AD. So in other words, within a generation of when John wrote his gospel. If John wrote his, maybe 2 generations. If John wrote his gospel as early as the 70s or the 80s, which I think is quite likely, although some would argue that it's the 90s, but I'll say 70s, then we have within 30, 70 years, a copy of this. It is not a product of the late church. It is a product of the first century. If you got a copy that dates to the beginning of the 2nd century, then the gospel itself had to be written in the 1st century, which is the century of Yeshua. We can trust in the eyewitness account. Now, whether you like what he has to say or not, that's a different story. But the fact that it's an eyewitness account and this is actually what he saw, what he says he saw, we can't argue with. But these have been written, in other words, the signs that I chose, these have been included in the gospel here, so that for the purpose of you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing, so what, ipso facto, if you believe that Jesus is the Christ, Son of God, you may have life in his name. John is telling you the purpose. Everything he's written is written for a purpose. It is so that you may believe. Not for the sake of belief, but there is an ipso facto to the belief. There is a repercussion, a consequence to the belief, and that is eternal life through the authority of the name of Yeshua. Actually, if you look at I hate talking to you about language, about the translations, but I actually think the emphasis of the construction that John wrote here is not specifically that you would know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And by the way, those are 2 ways of saying the same thing. Messiah, Son of God, those are interchangeable terms. We've talked about that before. I'm sure we'll talk about it again in the future. But nonetheless, it's not to show you who Jesus is. Is Jesus the Christ, the Son of God? No, it doesn't really answer that question, John is saying. Turn it around. Not who is Jesus, but who is the Messiah? Who is the Christ? Who is the Son of God? John has written his gospel so that you would know when it comes to who is the Messiah, who is the Son of God. The answer is clear. It's Jesus. That may be a subtle distinction to some of you, but I think it speaks volumes. Not that Jesus is the Messiah, but that the Messiah is Jesus. So, if we take that Gospel of John purpose statement again, using the standard interrogatories that I like to approach the text of the Bible, well, any text I approach with, asking who, what, where, when, how, and why, we'll see that if we take this purpose statement apart, deconstruct it, if you will, who are the who's in this statement? Well, Yeshua, the disciples, and you, the reader. What does he want us to know? About Yeshua's other signs that he didn't include, the recorded signs that he did include, and specifically that Yeshua is the Messiah, the Son of God, or conversely, that the Son of God, the Messiah, is Yeshua. Where did this happen? Well, these events happened in the presence of the disciples, and they're recorded in this book that we've read together for over a year. When did these things happen? Not 300 years later, not 200 years later, not looking back all that time. No, within the lifetime of the eyewitness. In other words, during Yeshua's ministry. Why did John write this? So that you, the reader, and even 2,000 years later, anybody who's reading it, that would be us, so that you, us, we may believe and have life. What kind of life? Life in his name. And how will we do this? We read. we read. So by seeing or orally, we hear the gospel as John presented it, his eyewitness account. And what we have read or what we have heard, we believe. So that's the Gospel of John purpose statement in a nutshell. Now we get to the epilogue as we wrap things up, and truly John is tying up some loose ends here. We take ourselves now in chapter 21, the last chapter of John, we take ourselves to Galilee. And here we find ourselves at Galilee. After these things, Yeshua manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. That's the Sea of Galilee, called Tiberias because Tiberias is the capital of that region right there. If you've been with me to Israel, if you've been to Israel, I'm sure you've been to Tiberias. You know why it's called the Sea of Tiberias, Sea of Galilee. And he manifested himself in this way. Here's how it went down, in other words. So John's going to say, there's a third time he appeared to us, and here's how it went down. And it's not surprising that we find Yeshua and the disciples in Galilee because Matthew and Mark tell us that Yeshua told the disciples, don't stay or stick around in Jerusalem after the resurrection. Go to Galilee for a while, then come back to Jerusalem to receive power. But Yeshua said to them in Matthew 28 and then in Mark 16:7, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. This is the angels. He's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So the disciples understood some of the appearances would occur in Jerusalem. Some of it would occur in Galilee. Their home base, for goodness sake. You'll remember the reason they were in Jerusalem was for the week of Passover. So it's not surprising that Yeshua appears to them after the resurrection during the week of Passover, sometime after that. Remember, they've got 50 days between then and Pentecost, 40 days before Yeshua ascends. So at some point, they go back to Galilee. And Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, it's the same doubting Thomas who became Drama Thomas, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples, not important enough apparently to mention by name. They were together. So you've got these disciples, 7 disciples together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will also come with you. Why would Simon go fishing? Shouldn't he be out sharing the gospel? Well, first of all, they fish at night, right? So they're going to be fishing through the night, and it's not like the disciples, simply because they've experienced the resurrection, that they've stopped eating. They still have to eat. They still have to make a living. They still support themselves. So they go fishing. This is a profession, after all, of at least 4 of the disciples, of the apostles. And they said, we'll come with you. And they went out and got into the boat. This is the model of the Jesus boat that we've been to Israel. We've seen the remains of. And that night, they caught nothing. So they're in the boat through the evening. It's a waste of time. They caught nothing. But when day was now breaking, so with the dawn, we now go to the beach. Disciples are still in the boat. Yeshua, Jesus, stood on the beach. And they, of course, being over 100 yards away or so, they cannot make out who that figure is. They see there's a figure standing on the beach. And yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus, not because they were obtuse, not because Yeshua had transformed himself in his resurrected body, because simply eyesight is what it is in the early hours of the morning and the dawn. They could not make out who that character was standing on the beach. So this character calls out to them. Again, it's only 100 yards, so over the water, voice can travel. So Yeshua said to them, children, so it means guys. Hey guys, it's kind of a slang. Hey guys, you do not have any fish, do you? And they answered him, no. And so he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll find a catch. Now, How ridiculous you think. If you've ever fished, you know that the fish are in the water. The boat's in the water, the fish in the water. The fish are not, there's no lanes that the fish are traversing. There's no markers, okay? Well, you've got the wrong way. You're going the wrong way on your net. You got to put it in the right way. If they got the right of way there, put it on the right. If they're not on the left, they're not on the right. They're not biting today. But nonetheless, this figure says, all right, cast it on the right-hand side of the boat. You'll find a catch. They decide to do so. What the heck? So they cast. And then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. So apparently there was a right of way on the right side. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved, now who is that? That's the guy who wrote this gospel, the beloved disciple. That's John. And John's putting two and two together. He can't make out who it is. Of course you can't. Even his young eyesight can't make that out. But the guy called out and said, you're not catching fishes. Switch it over to this side. Now, boom, it's an overabundance of fishes. The nets are full to capacity. I know who that is. Ding, 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 ding. It is the Lord. He said to Peter. So when Simon Peter heard it's the Lord, put his outer garment on, for his stripped for work. Doesn't mean that Peter is walking around on a boat naked. It simply means that he is wearing only his outer garment, and it's free-flowing because he's working. And so what he's going to do is he's going to jump in the sea. So he wraps his outer garment tightly around him, girds up his loins, if you will, so his free flow to be able to swim with his legs, and he threw himself into the sea. It's not like Jewish fishermen are in the habit of walking around, in the all together. That's not what it's saying. But the other disciples came in the little boat. Sure, leave us with the boat dragging in the net, Peter. Sure, okay, sure. You go swim and we'll do the work. But the brothers said they came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land. It's about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So now they're one guy down because Peter wanted to get to the Lord. He was so excited to see him. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid and the fish placed on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you've now caught. Full net worth. And Simon Peter went up and he drew the net to land. So the guys have hauled the boat. They've rowed the boat to shore. Hallelujah. And so Simon, all right, you guys really, you did a lot of work. And Simon Peter, he really must have been a pretty tough guy, really strong guy. And so Simon Peter goes, I got this. And while the disciples had been struggling, Peter gets out and he draws the net to land by himself. Tough, strong man, no question. Man's man. He drew the net to land, full of large fish, not just minnows. These are not sardines. These are large fish. And there's 153 of these fish. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. So what's important to notice here, not the number, but that the net was not torn. This kind of thing has happened before. Remember in Luke, Jesus told them, cast over to the side, and they cast, and the nets were tearing because there was so many. Well, this time the nets didn't tear, but there were so many. Now, teachers over the years, 2,000 years, have really wanted to make a big deal about the significance of the 153 fish. What is the significance of 153 fish? Because it's John, and because he wrote the Revelation of John, the Apocalypse, that surely this is a symbolic number, and that there is some secret code, there's some secret significance. So here are some, and this is just some, these are the highlights of some of the ideas that people have, that you can read about, that people have come up with, the idea of why John gives us the number 153 fish. Well, One example, one answer is that, well, there were 153 known species of fish in the world at that time, and Jesus is demonstrating his authority over the fish kingdom, over the kingdom of the sea, which I guess, I don't know, John is trying to make him Aquaman. I don't know exactly why that would be impressive, but there actually are more species of fish than 153. Another idea is that, well, 100 of that 153, 100 is for the fullness of the Gentiles, and then add 50 for the Jewish remnant. You got the church, Gentile, 2 times as many Gentiles as there are Jews, and then add the number 3, carry the 3 for the Trinity, and you get 153. All right. Another is that, oh, this is one of those very special numbers. This is for the math nerds out there. Did you know that 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10 plus 11 plus 12 plus 13 plus 14, 15 plus 16 plus 17 equals, guess what? 153. How fascinating. In fact, it is a triangular number. If you were building a triangle, you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you could build a triangle that would equal 17, and you'd get 153. A triangular number, and because it's triangle, 3 sides, it indicates perfection. And so this is the perfect catch, I guess. I don't know. One would say that the number of 17 again, you got 10 commandments plus the 7-fold Spirit of God. That gives us 17, the triangular number. Boom. Or how about again on 17? Back in John 6, you got Jesus multiplying 5 loaves. Left over were 12 baskets. That gives us 17. Or how about we go into gematria, the numerical value. What could you write that would equal 153 numerically? And children of God in Hebrew equals 153. Also, church of love. So children of God and church of love in Hebrew equals 153. First of all, why would you choose those phrases? Second of all, John's gospel written in Greek, not Hebrew. So, or how about this one? The significance of the number 153, the fish that was caught, is because the apostles caught exactly 153 fish. That's my answer. Okay? Why did John give us 153? Because it's a lot of fish. It is a record number of fish to go into the Guinness Book of Jewish World Records at that time. There's never been a time since that a Jewish fisherman has caught 153 fish at one time. You can't take that to the bank. I'm not saying amen, amen, but it makes sense to me. So Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples ventured to question him, "Who are you?" knowing that it's the Lord. And this sounds like kind of weird. You know, if they know that it's Yeshua, if they know it's the Lord, then why would they ask, "Who are you?" So no wonder they don't venture, because they know who it is. What I think John is trying to communicate to them is that nobody wanted to broach the subject. Hey, it's you again, the resurrected Christ, my Lord and my God. They're all kind of still, the resurrection is still, if you can imagine, a fresh idea, a new idea. Seeing the guy that you've palled around with, your teacher, for 3 years, alive after being crucified, is still a really novel concept. And here they are having not only are they having breakfast with him, but he's cooking breakfast for them. The Lord, my Lord and my God, the resurrected Messiah, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, is having breakfast, cooking breakfast with them on a beach. So it was not it was like the elephant in the room, in other words. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. In fact, when we go to Israel, we always have some lunch where we have what's called the St. Peter fish, and a nice loaf of bread like that. This is what it looks like. This is the kind of fish that you would generally catch in. There are 153 species in the Sea of Galilee. There's this species, basically. This is the fish that you eat from Galilee. Now, this is the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples. Remember the night of the resurrection? A week later, when Thomas said, "My Lord and my God." And now here we have the third time he shows up to his gang, manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So remember, the passage begins with, and Jesus was manifested to the disciples in the Sea of Galilee. And now 14 verses later, we bring this little section of the story to a close using the same word, manifested, after he was raised from the dead, thereby closing this story. There's still one section left to tell, which we will carry on after the Jewish holidays, after the holidays are over. Gives us some perspective and some breathing room for us to be able to see how the Gospel of John finally concludes. I'll give you a spoiler alert. If you don't want to know, close your ears. With the restoration of Peter and a commissioning to Peter. But again, there are loose ends. Remember, the last time Peter's seen him was when he had betrayed him, when Yeshua was arrested. And Peter's denial 3 times that he even knew him. So that's a dangling loose end that has to be tied up before the Gospel of John is over. But for us, let's tie up some loose ends for this particular story. The biggest loose end, of course, when it comes to the Gospel of John is, do you believe? After all this, week after week, month after month, chapter after chapter, section by section, verse by verse, do you believe? And if you do believe, what are you doing about it? And does your life reflect your faith? If you believe, are you keeping this to yourself? Or does your faith impact how you live your life on a daily basis? And does your faith in Yeshua, has it changed your life sufficiently that those who are in your circle, your sphere of influence, can recognize that your life reflects your faith? And not only your life, but do your life choices reflect your faith? Each day, we are faced with countless, myriad choices. Some as simple as, where are we going to lunch after church today? What am I going to have for breakfast? Shall I get on that treadmill today or not? Or shall I just sit on the couch watching Amazon Prime? It's a complex question to have to wrestle with. Questions like, but there are other questions, moral questions. And do your choice, will you break the speed limit on your way home today from congregation? Will you use your hands to gesticulate if another driver cuts you off on the highway? Will you all of a sudden speak with your hands? Will you be short with your spouse after he asks you or she asks you for the umpteenth time, where are my keys? All kinds of choices that we make. We have a big choice coming up in, under 2 months now. That's who to vote for and how to vote. Shouldn't be a choice for us. For some of us, it's a choice, well, will I vote? Do I care enough to? Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. It's a dirty business. But of course, politics is simply the formalized expression of cultural life choices that we make. And we as Americans have a government that is by the people, for the people and of the people, that means us. And with Yeshua saying, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, we have a responsibility to get out to the polls. We have a responsibility to vote. And we have a responsibility to make sure that our choices reflect our faith. And so some of you may say, well, I don't like the guys who are running. Both candidates running for president turn me off. Okay, make sure you vote. If that's the case, sure, and that's for a lot of people. Make sure you vote for the guy or against the guy that reflects or speaks against your faith values. For example, is there a guy who's going to defend Israel? Is there a guy whose track record has been not in favor of Israel? Is there a man who is a peacemaker? Is there a man who is always in favor of war? Is there a man who will stand up for life? Is there a man who will allow babies to be aborted up until the time of birth? Is there a candidate who will stand up for the law and order that God says government was designed to ensure? Or is there a candidate who will allow violent riots and societal mores to disintegrate? All right, but well, maybe you don't like any of them. Even so, it's too hard a choice. The old guy or the orange guy, this is too hard. It's too hard to figure it out. I want to remind you that president is just one thing that you vote for. As a believer, you want to make sure you're voting for your senator, because these are the guys who really affect our lives. Senate, Congress, mayor, district attorney, local judges, county clerks in Texas. These are the guys who can shut down or facilitate the meeting of churches, for example. So there are lots of choices that we have on the table before us. We want to make sure that every life choice on a daily basis and every choice that we take as our in fulfilling our responsibility as a citizen, that our choices reflect our faith. They, the candidates, do not need to share our faith. I would vote for an atheist. I would vote for a wild man if he will uphold the rule of law, if he'll stand for life, if he'll defend Israel, if he will establish justice in the courts and order in the streets. I'm not voting for pastors. I'm exercising my faith, not their faith. So something for us to think about, thrown in for nothing, no extra charge. Next week, the Jewish festivals. Very exciting, but between now and then,